This is our 10th, believe it or not, our 10th Lex Advanced topic. And today the focus is on how you can allow your learners to reflect on their learning in Brightspace. Basically, we're talking about the self-assessment tool. I do like to start with this invitation. If you do tweet to join the conversation about EdTech, educational technology, use the hashtag EdTech, also FactDev, and if you can tag at ZulaCat. The workshop slides and the resources that I'm referencing today are on our wiki, and you can find that at catwiki.zula.edu/self. Our producer will drop that into the chat, and you can also scan the QR code. Our Learn Everywhere Zula course was designed around the Quality Matters standards. And so in particular today, we're going to focus on Quality Matters Standard 3.5. The course provides learners with multiple opportunities to track their learning progress with timely feedback. Additionally, Checkin and Gamson's 7 Principles of Good Pedagogical Practice, number 4, gives prompt feedback. And in particular, knowing what you know and do not know is going to focus learning. So your students need appropriate feedback on their performance to benefit from your courses. They need help in assessing existing knowledge and competence, and they need frequent opportunities to perform and receive suggestions for improvement. In Macmillan and Hearn's article, Student Self-Assessment, the Key to Stronger Student Motivation and Higher Achievement, they define student self-assessment as this process by which students can monitor and evaluate the quality of their thinking and their behavior when they're learning, and then identify strategies that can improve their understanding and skills. And so there's this student self-assessment cycle that they talk about. And with this student self-assessment cycle, there's the self-monitoring, where there's an awareness of your thinking or actions, and then this self-judgment, so you know your progress toward your learning targets, and then learning targets and instructional correctives, where you can implement some strategies to improve your performance. So there's this cycle that's taking place. I found this resource from the Center for Teaching Innovation at Cornell University on self-assessments. And so why would you want to use self-assessments? It's going to promote the skills of reflective practice and self-monitoring, also academic integrity through the student's self-reporting of their learning process. It develops, to help them develop self-directed learning, can increase student motivation, and helps them develop a range of personal transferable skills. Some considerations for using self-assessments. If you're doing this, the difference between a self-assessment and self-grading will need clarification with students. That process of effective self-assessment is going to require some instruction and sufficient time for the students to learn. They may be used to a system where they have little or no input on how they're being assessed and are often unaware of the assessment criteria. Students will want to know how much the self-assessed assignments are going to count toward their final grade in the course, right? Incorporating the self-assessments can motivate the students to engage with the material more deeply. Implementing these self-assessment assignments can take more time. And research shows that students can be more stringent in their self-assessment than you would be as the instructor. When you're getting started with self-assessments, what you would need to do is identify which assignments and criteria are going to be assessed, and then articulate the expectations and clear criteria for that task. And this can be accomplished with rubrics and checklists. Also, you would need to motivate the students, so you can frame your assignments as an opportunity that they can reflect objectively on their work, determine how the work aligns with the assignment criteria, and then ways for improvement. You can provide an opportunity for the students to agree upon and take ownership of that assessment criteria. And then this one, consider using an exam wrapper or an assignment wrapper. And basically, this is a short worksheet that asks the students to reflect upon their performance on that exam or that assignment, how they studied or prepared, and then look at it and determine what can they do differently in the future. And on that wiki page, you will find a link to some sample exam wrappers and assignment wrappers from Carnegie Mellon, if you were interested in seeing what an exam wrapper and assignment wrapper may look like. In Brightspace, that self-assessments tool, you can find that in the activities menu, and you'll see self-assessments there. And the self-assessments tool is a formative assessment tool. And with it, the learners would be presented with a series of questions, and then they would get immediate feedback for their responses. So as they're selecting their answers, they would get immediate feedback. These responses are not graded, so the questions don't have a point value or a difficulty level indication. When you're setting up a self-assessment, it's just like creating a quiz inside of Brightspace. You're going to be creating some questions for your self-assessment. Your better choices for question types are multiple choice and true false. And this is because when you utilize the feedback for the question, you can provide why the answer option is correct or incorrect. And so this is what's going to help the students learn when they make an answer choice, what went right or what went wrong, you know. You can use other question types. For example, written response or the short answer, but in the feedback field, you really have no idea what the student how they would have responded. So basically you can indicate what a typical correct answer would be. The same holds true with the fill in the blanks question type. You can indicate what the correct answer would be, since you have no idea what they may have typed in. If you use the arithmetic question type, as you know, the numbers that the students would get for the questions is going to vary. And so in the feedback, you can provide them with a correct formula, but you wouldn't be able to explain to them why their actual answer is incorrect. Same with ordering. You can use ordering. And with this, the specific information for the answer option is only going to be shown for the overall feedback, right? And so what you could do in your overall feedback is just show the options in the correct order. And here's an example of a question that is formulated inside of Brightspace. And notice here on the question for the answer choices, each answer choice has a feedback option, but the feedback here just says whether or not the answer is correct or incorrect, and then utilizing the overall feedback to provide more information to the student. This could be more effective if why each answer choice was correct or incorrect was provided. But if you set up your question inside of Brightspace this way, where you had the overall feedback down here, if we were to preview this question inside of Brightspace, it would appear this way. And then the overall feedback would appear here in the check my answer. So as the student sees this question, they could click on this check my answer and then view what you have for the overall feedback. I would suggest if you are setting up your question, then perhaps consider it this way so that the individual feedback in this multiple choice question, so that the feedback for the individual answers, not only does it say your answer is not correct, but it goes on to explain why that particular answer is correct or not correct. And in this example, the overall feedback is left, it's blank. And so if the student were to view this particular question, it would appear this way. Since the overall feedback is blank, there's no check my answer here. But when the student selects an answer choice, what would happen is they would see a pop-up immediately with the feedback that explains the answer is not correct and then why it is not correct. Also, I'm not sure if you've been using the quizzes tool inside of Brightspace to create quiz questions. I notice most people are just creating the questions right inside of the quiz. And you can do the same thing with the self-assessments tool. However, I do suggest that you create your questions in the question library. You can organize the questions by type and then just pull those questions in. So utilizing the question library is what I suggest, and you can repurpose the questions and use them. All right, and with that said, what I want to do is get into Brightspace, and we can actually take a look at how you would create a self-assessment in Brightspace. So I'm going to go into my Brightspace course. Do I have any questions before I get into this? Okay. All right, and remember, when you're in your course under activities and there's an option for self-assessment. So this is one of the ways that you can get to your self-assessments tool. And in self-assessment, notice I have this blue new self-assessment button. So I could click on this and immediately start creating the self-assessment, but I don't want to do that. Remember, I suggested you use the question library. And so I'm going to click on this link for the question library. And this question library, you can organize it. These are called sections. So it's just putting questions inside of folders, which Brightspace is referring to them as sections. So if I want to create, and I have 3 sections here. If I want to create a new section, then I would click on this blue new button, and then I would select section here. You can also just create questions directly here at the root, but that would create a bit of a problem. Like I said, if you organize your question library into sections, then you can find your questions easier. All right, so.
Question?
Yes.
Is the question library for the self-assessments the same as the one for the quizzes, or are they 2 separate?
It's the same. So you can use the question library for the quizzes tool, the surveys tool, and for self-assessments. Yes. Thank you. All right. And so anywhere in Brightspace where there is an asterisk, that's a required field. So when you're creating a section, the one field that you have to fill in here is going to be the section title. The other ones are optional and pretty self-explanatory. So if I let's say I'm going to create some questions related to disposition of assets. And then I don't need section text. I don't need these others, but if they were important to me, I could. And then I will click on this blue save button. And notice what happens. I have another section here, right? So I could just simply click on the link to get into that section. And then this is where I would begin creating my questions. Rather than creating a question from scratch, I want to show you some of the questions that I have in some of these other sections. And what I'm showing you now is how you create questions one at a time. I am going to show you some tools that you can use where you can create multiple questions so you don't have to create them one at a time. Anyway, I'm in now my stock dividends section. And if I look at this first question, it is multiple choice. And the question itself is here, but notice I'm also using the hint field. And then I have 4 possible answer choices. And below each answer choice is the feedback that would help the student understand if they chose that answer, why that is correct or incorrect. I'm choosing here not to include anything in the overall feedback. And you recall I said for self-assessments, they're not graded. But because it is a question that's in the question library, you're going to have to give it a point value. But this is not going to be used for scoring, right? And then over here on the right, you actually see a preview of what the question looks like. So if I go back and take a look, for example, at this capital gains section, I have one question in here. And it's the same thing, the question itself, a hint, and then my answer choices each one followed by feedback. But then I also included some overall feedback here as well. So it really depends on how you're trying to set up the question and the answer choices to help the students understand. And then the last one that I'm going to show is this self-assessment section, which has some true-false questions, because multiple choice and true-false tend to work best for self-assessments. And so for the true-false question, this question itself, and then true, the why this would be true, false, why the feedback as to why it's not correct, and then some overall feedback for this question. So you would be building your questions, like I said, in this question library. Once you do that, I'm going to say I'm done editing questions in the question library. That takes me back to this self-assessments page where I was. So I can create a new self-assessment because all I've done now is just created the questions. I need to create the self-assessment. So I will click on this blue new self-assessment button. And I need to give my self-assessment a name. So I'm going to call this one Check Your Understanding, Capital Gains. I'm also going to categorize this. And this category here indicates how the self-assessments appear inside of that self-assessments tool. I can, if I have hints, I can check this box that said I want to allow hints. Do I want to shuffle questions? At this point, I only have one question for this. And then for the page header and page footer, I can include some information there if I want. But what I do need to do is if I'm entering some information here for the page header or the footer, I need to make sure that I turn it on. So now notice on this new self-assessments page, I don't have very much else here, right? And it's like, okay, how do you get the questions here? Well, what you need to do is once you enter this information, then click this gray save button. And now you see I have an add edit questions button. So this is where I can add the questions. So I'm going to click this add edit questions. At this point, as I mentioned, you could type your questions here one at a time. However, since we did create questions in the question library, that's what I want to do. I want to go to the import and I want to browse the question library. And so what's shown to me are the sections in my question library. And so I can select any of these that I want. If I want to bring in a whole section, I just select the section and it will select all the questions. There's only one question in this particular section, or I could pick and choose. You have some other ways to sort and filter to find questions to put in. Once you've selected the questions that you want, then you would choose import. And now this section is in my, my self-assessment that I'm creating. I only have this one section, so I will click on Done Editing Questions. When I come back to this page, unlike in the quizzes tool, I actually do not see the questions themselves. I just have this gray Add Edit Questions button, but the question is there. And so at this point, I can click on Save and Close. And now in my, I have 3 categories, and these are my self-assessment. If you want to preview or see the self-assessment as the student would, then you click on the arrow on the right of the name, and then you can choose Preview. I'm actually going to, I'm going to get into this one, stock dividends, so you can see what I did with this one. Okay. So here in my page header, I want the students to know why I'm asking them to do self-assessment, how it's beneficial to them, if they have any questions that they can contact me. That's basically the only difference between the sample one I just created. And as I mentioned, in this view, I actually don't see the questions that are there. But if I click on this gray Add Edit Questions button, I see that what's being pulled in is this stock dividend section. And so there are actually 3 questions in there. So if I choose Done Editing Questions and then just cancel this, I'm doing this because I want to preview this one so you'll see what the students would see. So if the students were to take this self-assessment, they would see that page header, which has the information that I want them to be aware of. And then they would begin to see the questions. This first one has a hint. And so this is how the hint would appear. They click on this link to expand the hint and collapse it. And then as they choose an answer choice, they get the immediate feedback. And as I mentioned, they won't get a grade, but they get immediate feedback when they start selecting answer choices. Great. I'm going to exit this preview. Do I have any questions so far? All right. And so students can get to the self-assessments either through this going to activities and self-assessments where they would see these, or what's preferable is for you to go ahead and drop that in a module in your content area. So if I created a module here called Check Your Understanding. And if I go to existing activities and self-assessments. Let's say I want to bring in the, I don't know, this one. And then here is the self-assessments, the link to that particular self-assessment. All right. Okay. And so let me go back. Do I have any questions before I move back? No?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
So you can't see their answers at all?
Correct. So what happens is this self-assessment is basically for the student so that they can use it and see what they know and don't know. So basically, the only thing that you would be able to do is you can see whether or not they have actually clicked on the link for the self-assessment or they've accessed it. You have no, you have, pardon me?
You can't even see if they answered all the questions?
Correct. You are unable to see how they did. The only thing that you would be able to see, for example, in the last Lex Advanced workshop when we talked about the completion summary and the other options for click tracking. So if I click on this check your understanding, I can go over here to the completion summary and actually see whether or not a student may have clicked on the link for that. But you actually cannot see how they did. That's correct. The self-assessment, there's no grading. You have no way of knowing what they have done.
But you could know that they finished.
Correct. Well, you could know that they clicked on the link for it, that they accessed it. And the way to know that would be to, pardon me?
Well, I mean, I see the place there where it says complete.
Yes.
Completed, would you be able to see which students completed it all?
That's correct. You would be able to see here if a student had clicked on the link, you'd be able to see that they visited that that's particular self-assessment. Yes.
Yes,
So
I
you
think,
could,
I think what she's asking is that they up there it's got all completed and incompleted.
yeah.
So if you click on the completed, does it show that they at least went through the whole thing?
No, completed here means whether or not the student actually clicked on the link. So it's, did they visit this particular content topic? So you have no way of knowing if there were 20 questions in your self-assessment. You have no way of knowing if the student actually looked at one question and tried to answer it in that self-assessment or if they went through all 20. So this is a tool basically for them to help them figure out what they know and don't know by running through the, going through the self-assessment and trying to understand the why the answers are correct or incorrect that they're choosing.
So totally formative.
Correct.
I have one question.
Yes.
For whenever you upload, you mentioned like it's good if you upload it under content in its own module to kind of like have like a check stop. Whenever you want to like link it, is that existing activities button always going to be there? Like I'm like trying to recall how it looks like originally, but is that button will like
Yes.
it'll always be there for us to link things?
Correct. So when you're in content, no matter which module you're in, when you add a module, you'll see that there's this gray existing activities button. And when you click on this, what you're telling the system is, I want to link to something that I've created somewhere else in the course. Okay. And so if I click on self-assessments here, then it will show me all of the self-assessments that I have in the course, and then I can just pull one of them, any one of them over or all of them. You actually you don't have to put all of the self-assessments in a single module. If you were organizing things by week and you wanted to include a self-assessment somewhere in that week, then you could just drop it in there. I just did this for demonstration purposes, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. All right, and so what you saw me do was actually enter the questions into the question library one at a time. And so there are some ways that you can, if you have, for example, questions that maybe are in a Word document and you wanted to get those up into Brightspace, you may have seen a question tool that I pointed you all to before, where there's some others that will allow you to do some other things. And so the one that I want to talk to you about now is this quiz question converter tool that is in the Brightspace community. There's a link to this also in that wiki. You'll find a link to this quiz question converter tool in the Brightspace community. And the page will explain to you how to go in and reformat questions so that you can use this tool to easily create a file that you can then just import into Brightspace. So let's say, for example, I've created I have some questions in a Word document and they look like this because, perhaps I was giving them to the students on paper. You can reformat your question so that an answer so that it looks something like this with this quiz question converter tool. So basically you would be identifying the correct answer by using this asterisk in front of the correct answer, right? You would identify something that's a hint by using this question mark. The feedback would be identified with 2 @ symbols, and this would be individual feedback for this answer choice. If I included 1 @ symbol, then that means I want to put that in the overall feedback box. So you can reformat information that you might have in a Word document so as you don't have to type the questions in one at a time into Brightspace, you might find that this is easier for you to do. And once you create your file with all of your questions formatted like this, you would basically copy that information and just paste it inside of this quiz question converter tool. I'm telling it remove the enumeration so that I don't have those in there, and then click on this green convert button and it will create a CVS file that I can then use to just upload all of the questions into Brightspace. So that may be a quicker way for you to get your questions into Brightspace. The other tool that we have at our disposal that the university has a site license for is called Respondus 4.0. And so you can create your questions offline using Respondus 4.0 and then take that information and then upload it into your Brightspace course. This is a Windows only program. So if you have a Windows machine, then this might be an option for you. If you're interested in using this Respondus 4.0 to help you get your questions into Brightspace, you have a Windows machine, then just email me and I can send you the download link and the license key so that you can utilize this. Okay, and so what I find in Brightspace is that you definitely want to pick the tool that is going to do what you want it to do. In other words, pick the right tool for the job. And so I have this comparison here so that you would see the difference between what happens with quizzes, surveys, and self-assessment. So in a quiz, the students can get feedback, but this feedback is going to be released to them based on how you set up your submission view. And the default submission view basically says that the students will only see their score. You can change the submission view or set up a submission view to allow them to see the feedback, but the feedback would be done sometime after they submit. And like I said, based on how you set up that submission view. If you use a survey in Brightspace, they can get feedback from that as well, but that would come in the form of a report after they have actually completed that survey. And as you saw in my demonstration of the self-assessments, that feedback is, they get it right away as soon as they click on answer choice. For you as the instructor, for a quiz, yes, you can see that some of the feedback, you can see the scores on, see their scores and the particular answers. So you can see all of that. With the survey, you can get reports. And if you set up the survey so that it's anonymous, you would see a result of that anonymously as well. So you can get that information. And then with the self-assessments, you can, as we mentioned or talked about, you can get reporting, but that is going to be limited to who has taken it. In other words, who has clicked on the link for it. And then some information about how much time they may have spent with that click tracking information. All right, doing a quick check-in. How are we doing? Any questions? All right. So I started with this Checkin and Gamson's principle number 4 gives prompt feedback. And the Center for Research on Learning and Teaching at the University of Michigan put together this information, some implementation ideas around this one. And they suggest return the exams promptly, preferably within a week, if not sooner. Schedule brief meetings with the students to discuss their progress. Prepare problems or exercises that give them immediate feedback on how well they're doing. And this is where that self-assessments tool could be helpful. Give frequent quizzes and homework assignments to help students monitor their progress. Written comments on the strengths and weaknesses of their work. Focused feedback early in the term. Communicate regularly with the students via email about various aspects of the class. And with this one in particular, intelligent agents could perhaps be helpful with this because they could help you with some of that communication that you might want to do with the students. And intelligent agents was one of the Lex Advanced topics that we discussed. I have a few tips for you. Tip number 1, create your questions in the question library. This will help you in organization and easy access. And the questions that you put there can be used between the 3 tools, the quizzes, surveys, and self-assessments tool. Tip number 2, there's no option to indicate the number of questions per page. You may have noticed when we were in the self-assessment, we couldn't indicate that we want to see 1 question on a page or 2 or whatever. So there's no option for that. So what I suggest you do is divide your self-assessment up. If it has a lot of questions in it, divide it up into smaller self-assessments. You also notice the restrictions option was not available. So you cannot prevent the students from taking a self-assessment. They can take it at any time. Now, let me back up and go here. When I put this self-assessment in this module in the course, you may know that if you click on this arrow, I can edit the properties in place, right? And so here I can enter dates and restrictions, and I can apply release conditions and put some availability dates here, that's fine. But what I'm doing is restricting them from seeing this link in this module. They can, even if I put restrictions here inside of this module, the student, if they go to activities and self-assessments, they will always see the self-assessments here. So you have no way of restricting them from getting to these. Right? Okay. Tip number 4, be clear. Provide clear, specific feedback on the wrong answer, why the answer is wrong, and direct the students back to content topics to help them understand what they're doing wrong. Tip number 5, utilize the quick links. These point back or a quick way to get back to course content. Tip number 6, we talked about this one as well. You cannot see how they performed, but you can use class progress, the content reports, and the completion tracking to see if they've accessed the self-assessment. And that is, as we mentioned, in the existing activities option. Tip number 7, reduce the student's stress levels. Consider naming the self-assessment something that is not as stressful, like check your understanding or knowledge check, so they know that it's not a quiz. Potential pitfall number 1. If you're utilizing that self-assessments tool when there might be another tool that will work better. So consider the capabilities of the tool to determine if it's the right tool for the job. Potential pitfall number 2, the students may often not want to do the self-assessments because they don't understand the benefits of it and don't see it as a valuable exercise. And so they won't put much effort into it. So you're going to have to explain to them the benefits of the self-assessment so that they can see that it is beneficial. All right, and here I've got some thumbs up, thumbs down. I see some value in utilizing self-assessments to allow my learners to reflect on their learning. Okay, I see a thumbs up. In the room too, I see a sideways thumb. Okay. All right. Was there a comment?
I really like the concept of self-assessments, and I actually use self-assessments all the time, but I do almost all of them through the quiz.
Okay.
Because by using the quiz, and I just use a lot of labeling, and with multiple choice, sometimes you can put all answers count for correct. So like I use it for, they have to watch their video, their own presentation, and then they do a self-critique. And so all answers count for points, but they have to answer it to get the points.
Yes.
And
yes.
The open-ended is really a little disappointing that Brightspace, as far as I can tell, maybe you know something I don't know, but as far as I can tell, you have no choice other than that it initially counts all of the manual graded written response wrong. If you want to have instant feedback on the non-manual questions, or if you want them to be instantly able to review, see their own result and review it themselves, which I often do, like you have to do the self-assessment, then we talk about it in class, and they need to be able to pull it up. Well, sometimes I haven't looked at them. So I go ahead and release them, and then I just tell them, look, temporarily Brightspace counts all your write-in response wrong until I go back and look. But I think they trust me. I mean, based on the answers that I see coming in, I think that they do have faith that they're not going to lose points for giving that honest reflection. So I mean, I really like that because as you said, they don't always know the value. If they weren't credit, I think they went to it.
Right.
But because they have to do it for points and they know
Yes.
that I'm actually gonna look at that answer
Yeah.
and I'm giving points for a real answer.
Yeah. As opposed to a click.
As opposed to a click, right? They know that if they skip the write-ins and stuff like that, that shows that they didn't make a good faith effort, they know they're not gonna get the points for that.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. The written response questions are not automatically graded by Brightspace. And so that's one of the reasons why I put up that chart about the differences between the tools, because it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, which tool is going to work best for you. And you found that the quizzes tool works best for you when you're doing your self-assessments, and that's the tool that you've landed on using, and that's great. I also want to point out that I mentioned rubrics earlier in this presentation, and we did one of the Lex Advanced topics was on rubrics, and so you have that available to you in the Lex course. You can go back to that, but with the interactive rubrics, as you're doing the clicking and scoring, you can actually put some initial feedback so the students would have some information about what was right or wrong about what they're doing. They get some information. Then learner progress. Also, if you did not attend our workshop a couple of weeks ago, we do have that information available inside of the Brightspace course as well. And so this is how the focus of this one was how you can utilize Brightspace to help the students stay on track. If you are not that familiar with using the quizzes tool in Brightspace, there is a blog post on the Cat Food blog. Hopefully all of you are following us on Cat Food. It's Brightspace tip number 4. And this would give you some additional information here about how to use the quizzes tool, or how tests and quizzes work in Brightspace. And then I do also want to point out a workshop that Jay did last semester, spanning the memory gap. And it was a great workshop on formative assessment and long-term learning. So if you haven't seen that, a link to this workshop recording is on that wiki resource page as well. And here's the wiki resource page, catwiki.zula.edu/self. Do we have any questions? I know I'm like a couple of minutes over. No. All right.
Thanks very much. It was really good, and it's going to make me think about how to use this. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around how am I going to get students to buy into this, to give time to this? Because if you don't, I guess the idea is that they need maybe they're going to get extra points for this, or I don't know. I'm just not sure how many students would actually participate in it.
Right.
Well, I think you have to give them some incentive, some small percentage. I mean, how much, like what percentage do you give them? Or it's just like a small rate
for those self-critiques, it's a 5-point assignment. It counts as much as our quiz offer reading.
Okay.
But they have to, I mean, it's a pretty long, this is in the personal selling class.
Okay.
Where they do these sales role plays. And so basically I make them grade their whole own role play. And there's very specific questions in it. Like they have to rate how well you did at asking questions about the buyer decision process. And then it has a follow-up written response question that says, list 2 questions that you asked. If you can't find 2 questions, adjust your rating accordingly and say you couldn't write 2 questions here. So it's really picky. It takes time to do it. And most students say that they learn more from doing those self-assessments than they do from almost anything else in the course, because there's just nothing like watching yourself do it and wishing that you said this or that. And then I don't get any arguments about my grade of their thing either, because they themselves know
Yeah.
they didn't ask these things or they didn't make these points. But it really takes them a lot of time to do that. So I think it's worth giving them the points for. And I do read them. I mean, the downside is that I do have to read them. But because I do it as a quiz format, I use the quiz tool for self-assessments, but I use the labeling. I use all these tricks that you mentioned in here. You can also do in the quiz tool. I mean, you can do the hints, the feedback.
Yes.
You can make the answer count as correct regardless of which one they pick. You can even do like partial credit, like one answer is 100 and then a better bad answer is 80%, or you can do things like that. And then I make it an instant feedback, ready to view public instantly. And then I just put a note there because you can customize what they see at the end. When they click submit, like by default, it says your quiz has been submitted successfully, but you can put anything you want in there. So I put in there, remember that Brightspace temporarily grades all your response wrong, and Professor Helm will go in and fix that later.
Mm-hmm.
So I put a little note like that, and there's questions built in there about what they want to improve for next time and things like that. And so you can do all of those good formative assessment kind of tools. You can using the quiz button for the same thing, and then you can track it and get stats on it and make them do it. Yeah,
that's great.
I'm sorry. I think that kind of self-evaluation that Amanda's talking about is great. They do that sometimes with quizzes as well. I think the kind of practice tests, self-assessments, that's a lot of what Janice was talking about. I don't give them any credit or extra credit or anything else. I just put them out there. And a good number of them do them. And the ones who don't are the ones who usually come to me after the first test and ask what they can do to do better. And I show them what they can do to do better, and then they do better. But I'm not gonna force them to, I'm not gonna force them to study in that way. I give them the tools to use it. They can choose whether or not to use it. I kind of think giving them points kind of takes away
from the formative assessment part of it. I can see that. I'm doing kind of a hybrid where this time where I'm doing using the rubrics for this. So they complete the rubric that I'm going to complete, and they have to defend their points. But then I've got a line in the rubric. So Elizabeth, how I give them the incentive is that I've got a line in the rubric that says for Dr. Hammer only, and it's how accurate and thoughtful they were about the rubric. So even by doing that, I'm evaluating, so yeah, that's interesting. It's a good point.
All right.
Interactive rubrics.
There will be an interactive rubrics function. Yes, right now I'm just getting the rubrics done because they have to be so detailed for students to be able to use them. Okay, that's been a great exercise for me doing these rubrics because it's been so detailed for them to be able to use them accurately. I'm just creating them now, and we're doing, they're doing it on Word and posting it. So I'm not using Brightspace's rubrics yet. Next semester.
Because it's basically so that's kind of what I do with that self-critique.
Yeah.
It's a copy of my rubric, but I made it into a quiz.
Yeah. Okay. Nice.
All right. Great. Thank you all for sharing. I do want to point out that you will get the workshop evaluation, and we do value your feedback, and especially would like to know what you'd like us to follow this up with. So if there's some specific topic or something that you want to see us cover, then by all means, please include that in your evaluation when you get it. You should get that by email. Your attendance in today's workshop earns you this self-assessments badge. And I always like to end up with the confetti. Congratulations. All right. And unless there's some questions, I'm going to stop my sharing actually.